The ban list is finally official, but what do you do if you're a budget player and your favorite deck just got hit? Well, don't worry, because in this video, I'm going to give you the top 5 best budget decks for the January 2024 post ban list competitive format. What's potion? You got Matt here, and welcome back to another competitive Yu-Gi-Oh video. I think we're all really happy with the ban list and what it's going to do for our format. It did significantly weaken many different decks, so if your deck got hit and now you don't know what to play, just sit back, relax, don't worry about it, because in this video, I'm going to be covering 5 different amazing budget decks that are going to allow you to compete against the top decks of the format for only about $100. So if you're excited for the video, then make sure to smash the like button. If this video hits 150 likes, then I'll bring you a full deck profile for any of the decks you see on this list. Also, if you like deck profiles, combo guides, meta discussions, and competitive Yu-Gi-Oh videos just like this one, you're gonna love this channel. So make sure to subscribe and help us reach our new goal of 5,000 subscribers. But with that being said, here are the top 5 best budget decks for the January 2024 post-ban list competitive Yu-Gi-Oh format. Let's jump into it. So before I get to number 5, we have to determine what the criteria is to figure out where these decks are going to place on the list. And the first thing we want to look at is going to be how good is the deck in the meta today. We also want to look at how budget is the strategy. If it's going to use up your full budget, then it may not be the best decision, considering that there's always going to be some upgrades you can make to the deck. And finally, the most important thing is going to be for a budget deck is how much room does it have to grow. If you're looking at a deck that you can't use other cards in this deck for other strategies, it's not going to make too much sense, and you definitely want to have access to that in your strategy. So starting off at number 5 is going to end up being Bystial Orcust. Yeah, this deck, I know you guys are probably a little bit surprised to hear it on this list, but it is still a very budget deck. There are some cards that are going to be very expensive in it, but the entire Orcust engine itself, especially with Harp Horror's now legalization, is incredibly low cost. It's about $10 for the whole engine, which is crazy when you think about it. Because of the low cost of the Orcust engine, we have about $90 to play with to figure out what are we going to use as a supplemental engine to the Orcust strategy. We could go with the Horus engine if we want to break the bank, but in this case here, Bystials do an amazing job, and you're going to see why in just a second. The main cards that are expensive in the Bystial engine are going to be Bystial Lubellion. Those cards are about $10 to $12 a piece, and you would like to play 3 of them, but honestly, you can get away with playing 2. And of course, Bystial Dispatter is sitting at about $35 right now. So just these cards here, 2 Lubellion and a Bystial Dispatter, you're sitting at around $55 to $70 depending on shipping as well, which is a lot. But then you can add in cards like Vision Resonator and the package that surrounds that, and of course, powerful generic extenders and great extra deck pieces as well. And just with those cards there, you can build an amazing budget deck for less than $100. One of my favorite things about this list is that Orcust monsters lock you into darks, and you can easily just play darks in your extra deck exclusively with the Bystials. And on top of that, because the Bystials are in the deck and you get access to Bystial Lubellion, you can also play Branded Regained, which is a great way to recycle your resources if you're an Orcust player. One of the most important things that you need to do as an Orcust player is to get your cards into the graveyard in a timely manner. So you definitely want to play cards that can do that for you. So cards like Foolish Burial, cards like Armageddon Knight, of course, are great. But on top of that, Dark Grepher is a fantastic option. And even better than that is going to be Chaos Space. The fact that you can send a Harp Horror or an Orcust Nightmare from your hand to the graveyard and then search for a Bystial Lubellion to then discard that and search for a Bystial Saronir or Magnuma to get your plays going is crazy. Really an amazing way to start getting your engine online by having access to Chaos Space. I definitely recommend playing it in this variant of the deck. But if the Bystial engine isn't your favorite, you can always add in something like the Ib engine with 3 copies of Signet Mining, 3 copies of Draconet, a Galaxy Serpent, and then of course Ib the World Child's Justiciar and the cards that come along with it. This engine here is going to allow you to just keep extending further and get additional bodies on board for powerful link plays, and of course end off with the classic Orcust combo of Masquerena with Dingirsu, Orcust Babel, and probably even Crescendo as well. The deck has a ton of room for growth. I would recommend eventually picking up copies of Assault Synchron and Excel Synchro Stardust Dragon as well, just to be able to give you additional plays that the deck can make. It's only at number 5 because in my opinion the deck isn't as strong as other decks on this list, but also more importantly because the deck itself deals with the graveyard a lot, and there are a ton of ways to hate on the graveyard in Yu-Gi-Oh today. Of course, cards like Dimension Shifter existed back when Harp Horror was originally legal, but it wasn't played as much because there weren't as many decks that could take advantage of it. But more importantly, the Bystials now exist. They didn't exist back in the day when Orcust was at its heyday in TOS formats, but they do now, and that is a problem for this strategy. So you gotta fight the Bystials with your own Bystials, in my opinion. At number 4 is going to be Exosister, specifically the Spirit Exosister version. You definitely want to be playing your copies of Aratama and Sakitama in this strategy because they get you additional ways to free rank 4s, which is really important. The entire core of the strategy is extremely budget thanks to the Megatons, minus of course Exosister Magnifica, which has gone up in price, but if that's your only expensive card, you're looking pretty good with this strategy. The entire deck relies heavily on having multiple Exosister Xyz monsters on their side of the field. They do this by having access to either the Spirit engine I mentioned earlier, or of course with multiple Exosister monsters as well. But there's one other way that they can do that, and that's by having their opponent move things out of the graveyard. Just having something like an Exosister Ellis, and having their opponent move something out of the graveyard gives them extra benefits by allowing them to Xyz right on top of that Ellis, and being able to just then shut down their opponent with negates and interruptions as well. Now obviously this will disincentivize players from using the graveyard as much as possible against this deck, but some decks can't always do that. but that's where you actually come in and say, you know what, I'm also playing Dimension Shifter, which is a crazy card. And yeah, look, Dimension Shifter is carrying this deck. I don't think it would be in the top 5 if Dimension Shifter wasn't a legal card, but it is. The graveyard is going to be a huge part of Yu-Gi-Oh! In 2024, just like it has been for the last 5 or 10 years. And we'll also have the release of amazing cards that utilize the graveyard. For example, Prometheus Princess, Bestower of the Flames is a fantastic card that everyone is expecting to be meta-defining, and the fact that it hates dealing with a card like Dimension Shifter is great for this strategy. On top of that, you look at decks that really utilize the graveyard that aren't going anywhere. Something like Unchained. Unchained may not be as strong as it once was because Sharvara is now limited, but it still is a very good deck. You also have Ib combos. With Ib coming back, the graveyard is being utilized quite a bit with that strategy, so you have to keep that in mind. And of course, Fire King. Fire King hates dealing with Dimension Shifter, so having access to that against that strategy is obviously an advantage. And of course, Vanadium. Vanadium can play through it kind of, but not well at all. So for that reason, I feel like this card here is going to be defining for Exosister as a strategy. The deck itself does have a few tough weaknesses to deal with. One of the biggest ones is going to be that its end boards is just not going to be as good as a lot of other strategies. But when it does actually get a solid end board going with something like Magnifica, it almost loses automatically to something like a Kaiju, which does hurt quite a bit. And if it leaves on 2 different Xyz monsters, because they share the same type and attribute, you can just super poly them away in something like a Garura, which obviously hurts quite a bit. So for that reason, it makes it a little bit tough to say Exosister will be a top tier deck, but for a budget deck, it's hard to do much better than that. And of course, with Dimension Shifter being main deckable in this strategy, you definitely have a solid strategy on your hands. At number 3 is Labrynth. Yeah, look, okay, Labrynth is a great deck. It's going to be arguably one of the best decks in all of Yu-Gi-Oh! In this format, but why do I only have it at number 3? Well, before I get to that, the deck itself is a very budget strategy, except for maybe 2 different cards in the deck, in Arius and in Big Welcome Labrynth. And that's really what we're getting at here. You can build a very good budget Labrynth deck that can do all the same things that a regular full power Labrynth deck could do, minus maybe 1 or 2 small things, but those small things do make the difference when playing at the highest levels. The deck has topped multiple high-level events in its lifetime, but since the release of Age of Overlord and Arius the Labrynth Butler, the deck has gone even better than that and done even better in those high-level events as well. As a trap deck, it innately has a weakness going second, but thanks to cards like Stovey Torby, Arius, and of course Kuklok, you're completely fine going second as well, because you can just play your game on your opponent's end phase as well. And of course, the big Labrynth monsters like Lady and Lovely Labrynth are fantastic ways to just interrupt your opponent and get additional advantage over the course of a long game, and of course just be generically tough to out. The deck also gets better every time a generic new normal trap card gets released. We're about to get Transaction Rollback, which is going to be an incredible card for this strategy, and honestly, I feel like if people are sleeping on this deck, they shouldn't be sleeping on it for very much longer. And with cards like Pot of Extravagance and Pot of Prosperity, the deck can be incredibly consistent as well. Now you might be saying, why on earth is this going to be in the budget tier? You want to play 3 Arius, you want to play 3 copies of Big Welcome Labrynth. Now you can't do that if you're playing a budget version of Labrynth, but you can definitely fit in your budget 1 copy of Arius and 2 copies of Big Welcome Labrynth and still have enough for the core of the Labrynth deck. Now your extra deck will not be very good, and that's a pretty big problem here. That's one of the reasons why it's not going to be the #1 spot on this list. If we had access to a full extra deck, it would be definitely fine at #1 in the strategy over here for the top budget decks. But because we don't have the extra deck, we can't take advantage of cards like SP Little Knight or Typhon or something like a Chaos Angel that can really help us out of some really tough spots as a Labrynth player. While the deck itself is still really consistent and powerful with only 1 copy of Arius and 2 copies of Big Welcome Labrynth, and honestly better than the majority of other budget decks for this price point, because you're missing out on cards like Chaos Angel, SP Little Knight, Typhon, the 3rd copy of Big Welcome, and the 2nd and 3rd copies of Arius, I can't put it at number 2 or 1 in the strategies for budget decks. It's not a full-fledged strategy, but it is still definitely better than most of the other decks you can get at this price point. At number 2, we have Floowandereeze, and while this deck is a fantastic choice because the deck itself is really low cost, you can get the entire deck core for about like $50, maybe even less than that because of all the reprints, and the only real expensive card you'd be actually adding to the strategy with time would be something like Triple Tactics Thrust. But honestly, you don't have to play Triple Tactics Thrust in Flu. It's nice to play, don't get me wrong, but it's not mandatory to play because the main card you're searching with that is going to be something like Harpy's Featherstorm, which you can just play at 3 copies anyways. The deck itself is really strong because special summoning right now is a huge part of Yu-Gi-Oh! Today, so having access to M-Pen to shut down the effects of special summon monsters is absolutely critical. On top of that, if they put something in defense position, they can just beat over M-Pen as well, which is really nice. And if they end up having a threat that can beat over M-Pen, you have M-Pen's hand effect as well to discard a card and have the attack of the other monster. It has some good matchups, but it also obviously has some tough matchups against some of the decks in the format today. One of the weirdest matchups is going to be against Rescue Ace because they can just use their trap cards to get rid of the M-Pen and play the game that way. And of course, Fire King, all of their cards activate and destroy in the graveyard. So for example, Kirin, when it's destroyed, will destroy the M-Pen as well, which is really unfortunate for your strategy. But you can counteract that by having access to Dimension Shifter, which is a fantastic card against Fire King and really your way to beat that strategy in my opinion. Now I can't guarantee you that Floowandereeze would be on this list if Dimension Shifter was banned, but the good news is it's not. It's still legal for Flu players to actually be able to just go off and do their thing. But another card that's legal is going to be Harpy's Featherstorm. This card is insane for the strategy, and yes, you want to search it off Thrust like I mentioned earlier, but for right now, having access to it as a non-searchable card that's just an absolute blowout against so many different strategies you definitely want to play it in this deck. The deck itself has had issues with consistency in the past because if you can't find something like Robina, you're going to have a really tough time. But thankfully with map and of course terraforming to get to there, prosperity and duality to get you to those cards as well, you're going to be in a really good position to have a chance to find those cards to get your engine online. It's also a deck that has a searchable way to DD Crow. If you guys saw my video on the best hand traps of the format, you would know that DD Crow is a fantastic option. The link for that video is up in the cards right over here. Before I move on to the number 1 spot, there was one deck that just barely missed the cut, and that deck is going to be Gold Pride Punk. This strategy here is really good and definitely fits within the parameters of being a great budget deck, especially with the fact that now something like Upstart Goblin came back to 3, the deck got a massive power boost because that card there alone is great. It lets you play a 37 card deck, which is really good, but the most important piece is going to be that it gives your opponent 1,000 life points, meaning that you can then use your Gold Pride effects in hand to summon themselves out without having to worry about just taking damage using the Punk engine as well. It does play into Droll and Lockbird quite heavily, and you can't really play around it at all, so for that reason I just couldn't put it into my top 5, but it is definitely a very solid deck nonetheless. Anyways, moving on to number 1 is going to be Fire King. Now look, Fire King is a fantastic option, and it is a really good deck if you're playing on a budget or if you're playing at full power without worrying about what the cost is. But I'm going to give you 3 options for Fire King decks that are all budget and they're really good as well. Of course, there's going to be pure. Just pick up the structure decks and of course a bunch of different generic hand traps and extra deck cards and you're in a great position. But even better than that is going to be with the Nadir Servant engine. That engine there with cards like Maximus, Shurig, and Garura in your extra deck as well are going to be really solid to get you access to extra consistency and really get your game plan going a lot faster than you normally would. But in my opinion, the best way to play a budget version of Fire King is going to be with Tri-Brigades. Having Tri-Brigades in this strategy is really nice. Of course, they synergize very well because some of them are fire monsters. They're also beast warriors, which is great to get off of something like Fire Formation Tenki. But more importantly than that, they give you access to a whole other branch that you can go down for interruptions and combos. Having access to a non-targeting, non-destruction form of removal in Shurig is obviously incredible, and you also have the non-destruction removal in the form of double Dragon Lords as well. These cards are really powerful, and they have a home in any Tri-Brigade variant of Fire Kings. While the deck is weak to something like Dimension Shifter, having access to something like Tri-Brigade Revolt really kind of stops that weakness from being as prevalent because you can just bring back the cards with Revolt and then link them off into Shurig and then send those cards to the graveyard from there, which is going to be a really nice way around that. I'll be honest with you though, because this is not the best way to play Fire Kings. None of these strategies are the best way to play Fire King, but if you do want to play the most optimal version of the deck, you'll have to shell out like $350 for copies of Wanted, Diabellstar, and Original Sinful Spoils, with of course the Ash, the Flamber's Dragon, cards like that. Not everyone can do that, so this is a really good option for someone who's on a budget who wants to play one of the best decks of the format, even though it's not going to be the most optimal way to play the deck. But as your budget keeps increasing and you're able to save more money, eventually you'll be able to purchase something like a Wanted or NSP Little Knight, which are going to go miles in this strategy. If you're curious about how a budget player would build a Fire King deck from the ground up, check out my series, the Yu-Gi-Oh! Budget Challenge, where I take 3 Fire King structure decks and $25 a week and look to build a powerful, consistent, and competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Deck while being on a budget. Episode 1 will be in the cards and of course in the description as well. And that is it, the top 5 best budget decks for the January 2024 post-banlist competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Format. Now I want you guys to let me know down in the comments, what did you think of the list itself, and did I miss any budget decks? Let me know down in the comments. And if you enjoyed the video, then do me a favor and smash the like button. If this video hits 150 likes, I'll bring you a full deck profile for whichever one of the decks on this list that you guys want to see. And finally, consider subscribing for more amazing competitive Yu-Gi-Oh! Videos and to help us reach our new goal of 5,000 subscribers. Thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you all next time.